Good evening, and welcome to Midvalley Bible Church's virtual prayer meeting for August 25th, 2021. My name is Doug Hornock, and I'm the pastor here at Midvalley Bible Church. Lord willing, if you are watching this on Wednesday night at 7 p.m., when it's posted on YouTube, Connie and I will be in the air returning from my mother-in-law's funeral in New Jersey. We are scheduled to land at 9 p.m. tonight. This will be my third funeral for Connie's side of the family. I did my mother-in-law's mother's funeral more than 35 years ago, my father-in-law's funeral 20 years ago, and now my mother-in-law's. But as I was reflecting on what I could share with you tonight, my mind went to a verse found in the 90th Psalm, a psalm written by Moses, which in all likelihood is the oldest psalm in the Psalter. And in verse 12, Moses says, "Teach us to number our days carefully, so that we may develop wisdom in our hearts." I want to encourage you to read Psalm 90 in its entirety. It's a wonderfully instructive psalm. In fact, I read it shortly after my mother-in-law died. And Moses in this psalm is reminding us of our own mortality. Numbering our days means recognizing humbly that we have a limited and set amount of time on this earth. It means not thinking so highly of ourselves that we live with a false sense of immortality. And Moses is saying that this is a very good thing. In fact, it's so good that he prays that God would help him to actually do it. And tonight, what I want to do is make 4 observations about numbering our days that I hope will be helpful for us. Number 1, numbering our days is not natural to us. This is a prayer. And like all requests we offer in prayer, it's born out of a need and an acknowledgement of something we cannot do for ourselves. And in this case, the thing that we cannot do for ourselves is know how to number our days carefully. In other words, we naturally assume that there will always be a tomorrow, that there will always be another chance for this or for that. And so we become procrastinators in our arrogance. We assume that the limited number of days we have on this earth will never come to an end. We think arrogantly that we're the charters of our own destiny. And Moses is saying, we need God's help to have a true gauge of our own mortality. James puts it this way when he says, you don't even know what tomorrow will bring, what your life will be. He says, for you are like a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. And what we need to do is avoid that disease of pride that assumes that we are in charge of the timetable of our lives. God has set the date of our birth and the date of our death. And as I've often shared with people, we are going to die on time. Second, numbering our days is not morbid. Now, I can understand why the non-Christian might suggest that it is. But for the Christian, thinking realistically about death is a good and motivating discipline. And sadly, I've met some Christians who are unwilling to talk about their own death. And they really need to, because it helps us to remember who we are in the grand scheme of the universe. And ultimately, it moves us to a greater sense of humility before God. Moses is asking that God would give us the right perspective on things, be they good or bad, and then to live in light of the limited amount of time that we had. Paul, I think, had that attitude in Romans 8:18, where he said, I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is going to be revealed in us. In other words, we take the long view of life and living. Thirdly, numbering our days is not about months and years. It's not so much a matter of how much time God gives us, but a mindset that marks the way we live. Moses is concerned about a lifestyle, a perspective, an attitude that reminds us of the rule, reign, and authority of God, an outlook that helps us see His greatness and our smallness. And finally, numbering our days is not about having a bucket list. It's not about having on our list that we want to someday ski Jackson Hole, Wyoming, or the Swiss Alps, or we want to get that trophy elk, or maybe play a round of golf at Pebble Beach. This is not a request for us to eat, drink, and be merry because tomorrow we're going to die, but it's something entirely different. Please notice that this verse has not only a request, but at the end of that request, an objective. And that is that we would have wisdom. We are asking God to teach us to number our days so that we may develop wisdom in our hearts. What is wisdom? Well, there's a lot of ideas, but I'd like to suggest tonight that wisdom is simply having an attitude where you do the best you can by God's grace with the resources and circumstances that are at your disposal, and we do it for the sake of God's kingdom and His glory. We're asking God to teach us to number our days so that we might be like Jesus. And by that I mean that Jesus knew for years that His time had not yet come. But when it did, and His days were complete, and He gave up His Spirit, He cried out, "It is finished." He knew that what He'd done was what God wanted Him to do. And so the prayer of Moses to teach us to number our days is saying, God, I want to do your will. I don't want to squander my days in foolishness, but instead I want to live wisely. I want to make the most of every opportunity that God presents before us, that we are going to live for His glory. And so with that truth before us this evening, let's now go to prayer, and let's pray for God's people. Let's pray for our church family.